All right, well, have you ever struggled with trying to live the Christian life through human power or human ability? And no matter how hard you try to be good, you just seem to fall short. And someone tells you to be good, but doesn't tell you how to be good. If that's you, then the Book of Galatians is for you, because what I just described there is legalism. Legalism simply means trying to live the Christian life through human ability. And probably the key verse in the Book of Galatians is Galatians 3 and verse 3. It says, "Are you so foolish? Having begun in the Spirit, are you now being perfected by the flesh?" So how foolish it is to begin with God by grace alone, through the power of the Holy Spirit alone, only to try to live out the Christian life through our own power. So where does the book of Galatians fit into the New Testament? Well, Paul, in the book of Acts, chapters 13 and 14, went on his first missionary journey into southern Galatia, about AD 48 to 49. And he was very prolific and successful in that journey, as the Lord allowed him to win many Gentiles, primarily non-Jews, to Christ and plant many churches. And he got back from where he left, which is Antioch, which is on the northern tip of the nation of Israel. And he got word that all of his converts were now drifting into legalism, because there were people coming in trying to tell him that, look, you need to live the Christian life through human power, and you need to obey the law of Moses, and you need to live it out through human power. And so Paul is very upset by this, and so he writes the book of Galatians to curb this problem of what we call legalism. And one of the things Paul had enemies, said about him is, well, Paul's not really an apostle, don't listen to him. So the book of Galatians has three parts to it. Chapters 1 and 2 are autobiographical in nature, and Paul explains his apostleship. Autobiography is just you're talking about yourself. And he had to explain that because he was sort of open to this charge, that he wasn't a true apostle, because he really wasn't one of the original 12. He wasn't there as an eyewitness to the earthly ministry of Christ. In fact, Paul didn't become a Christian until Acts 9, long after Jesus left the earth in Acts 1 in his ascension. So Paul explains that his apostleship is true, and that God is the one that orchestrated his apostleship and brought him into Arabia, where he was taught by the Lord for 3 years. And Paul, when he came out of Arabia, didn't teach some different doctrine. He didn't teach a different message than the apostles. He didn't teach a different gospel than the apostles. He taught the exact same thing, because he explains in Galatians 2 that he submitted his teaching to the original apostles, and they never added anything to what the man said. So Paul's apostleship is legitimate. And now that he gets his audience to understand that his apostleship is legitimate, he explains his doctrine, which is chapters 3 and 4. And chapters 3 and 4 is just about the fact that we are saved originally by grace alone, through faith alone, through Christ alone, under the power of the Holy Spirit alone. And Paul says that's how we grow as Christians. We grow under the same power that we're saved by, not through human power. So we walk moment by moment, depending upon the resources of the Holy Spirit that is within us, not through human power. That's how we grow as Christians and mature. And then you see the word therefore in chapter 5, verse 1. When Paul uses the word therefore, we always ask, what is the word therefore there for? And that typically in Paul is to transition us out of doctrine into practice. That's how the book of Romans is set up. That's how the book of Ephesians is set up. So in chapters 5 and 6, the third part of the book, he is teaching us how to apply the doctrine that he's taught us in chapters 3 and 4. So he talks about a lot of different things. One of the things he says in chapter 5, verse 16, "Therefore I say, walk according to the Spirit, and you will not fulfill the lusts of the flesh." And he tells us to walk by the Spirit and not by human power. And that's how we live the Christian life. And one of the things the Lord will reproduce in us when we have that moment by moment walk with the Lord is He'll reproduce in us the fruit of the Spirit, which is in chapter 5, verses 22 and 23. Love, joy, peace, self-control, gentleness, and those type of character attributes. And then in chapter 6, he talks about some other issues like giving and things like that as they relate to the spirit life. And then he concludes by pronouncing a blessing on the Gentiles. And then the smaller subset, the Jews within the churches. And that he concludes and he tells us to walk by this rule. He's defended himself in his apostleship, chapters 1 and 2. He's laid out his doctrine, chapters 3 and 4. And then he's transitioned us into doctrine or practice, chapters 5 and 6. So I'm sure you'll enjoy the book of Galatians as you get into it.